Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Stories That Scare channel, broadcasting from the darkest corners of folklore, the deepest mysteries of history, and the most chilling stories the internet has to offer. Every episode will uncover terrifying eyewitness accounts, forgotten legends, unexplained encounters, and stories so disturbing you'll have to decide for yourself what's real and what's waiting in the darkness. So dim the lights, lock the doors, and if you hear something outside, don't answer it, because tonight's story begins now. Before we begin, if you enjoy stepping into the shadows with us, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new nightmare. If you want to go even deeper into the darkness, you can also support us on Patreon or grab some official merchandise. It helps keep these stories alive and the channel growing. Now, take a breath, because once we start, there's no turning back. A 28-year-old backpacker had failed to return from a 3-day solo trip. His truck still parked at the trailhead in northern Ontario. I'd volunteered with search and rescue for almost 7 years by then. Most people assume it's exciting. It isn't. 99% of the time, it's long hikes, mosquito bites, sore feet, and hoping you find someone before the weather gets worse. Our team covered a large stretch of provincial forest. Every spring and fall, hikers, hunters, and campers underestimated just how quickly the wilderness could turn against them. Sometimes we'd find them sitting beside a creek with a twisted ankle. Sometimes they'd wandered off trail because they thought they found a shortcut. And sometimes we were simply recovering a body. You learn to accept that. Search and rescue isn't about miracles. It's about giving families answers. Over the years, I learned something else. The forest has rules, not written rules. The kind you only learn after spending hundreds of hours beneath those trees. Don't split up unless you're told. Don't ignore your radio. Don't assume every sound has an obvious source. At the time, I thought those were just lessons learned through experience. I didn't realize there were other rules nobody talked about. The call came in on a cool September afternoon for that backpacker, Ryan Mercer. His campsite had been found untouched, and his backpack was nowhere to be found. That usually meant one of two things. Either he was still walking, or someone else had moved it. Within an hour, 12 of us met at the ranger station. Maps covered the briefing table. The incident commander pointed to a winding trail that cut through nearly 40 square miles of dense forest. His name is Ryan Mercer, she said. Experienced hiker. Good physical condition. Last text to his wife was yesterday morning. She paused. He said he thought something had been following him since sunrise. A few people exchanged glances. Someone quietly muttered, "Probably a black bear." The commander nodded. "That's our best assumption." She assigned us into 4-person teams. I was paired with Mike, a retired conservation officer who had forgotten more about the woods than I'd ever know, Claire, a paramedic who volunteered every weekend, and Ben, the youngest member of our unit. It was only Ben's 3rd search. He was nervous, trying not to show it. By late afternoon, we reached the trailhead. Ryan's silver pickup sat exactly where the report said it would, locked, untouched. A thin layer of pine needles had already begun collecting on the windshield. Mike knelt beside the driver's side door. He's been gone longer than people think, he quietly said. We started down the trail. The deeper we walked, the quieter everything became. No birds, no squirrels, not even the usual buzzing insects, just our boots pressing into damp earth. About an hour into the search, Claire raised her hand. Tracks. We all gathered around, boot prints, fresh enough to still hold their shape. Mike compared them to the photograph on the missing persons report. That's probably Ryan. Relief washed over us. At least we knew we were heading the right direction. Then Mike stopped smiling. He crouched lower, brushed away a few fallen leaves, and exposed another line of footprints. These weren't hiking boots. They weren't bear tracks. They weren't wolf tracks. They didn't even look human. They were much longer than a man's foot. The impressions were unnaturally deep, and every single one of them was following Ryan's trail. Mike stared at them for several seconds before slowly standing. Without saying a word, he reached for his radio. Mike didn't radio everyone immediately, he just stood there, staring. I'd worked enough searches to know that wasn't normal. If he saw bear tracks, he would have said bear. If he saw wolves, he would have said wolves. Instead, he was silent. Finally, he pressed the button on his radio. Command, Team 3. The speaker crackled. Go ahead. Mike glanced down at the tracks one last time. We've located what we believe are the missing subject's footprints. Copy that. There was a pause. And we found another set following him. What kind of tracks? Mike hesitated. I can't tell. The radio remained quiet for a second. Then Command replied, photograph them and continue the search. Mike lowered the radio without answering. Claire took several pictures while Ben and I continued studying the prints. The more I looked, the stranger they became. Whatever made them walk on two legs. That much seemed obvious, but the stride didn't make sense. Some impressions were nearly 6 feet apart. No person could comfortably take steps that long through thick forest, especially not over fallen logs and uneven ground. Ben finally spoke. Maybe someone's messing with us. Mike shook his head. No. People fake tracks all the time, Ben insisted. Not like these. That answer only made things worse. We continued following Ryan's trail. Every few hundred yards we'd stop, check the map, call his name, wait, listen. Nothing answered. The forest remained unnaturally still. Around sunset, we found the first piece of evidence. Ryan's backpack. It was leaning upright against the trunk of a cedar tree, not lying on the ground, not tangled in branches, standing perfectly upright, almost placed there. Claire hurried over. She unzipped every compartment. His food was still inside, his water filter, his spare clothes, even his first aid kit. Only one thing was missing, his handheld GPS. Mike slowly looked around. Nobody abandons everything except their GPS. Ben frowned. Maybe he got confused. Mike didn't answer. Claire called command over the radio. Within minutes, they instructed every team to converge on our location. While we waited, I wandered only a few yards away to check for more tracks. That's when I heard it, very faint, almost carried by the wind. Help. I froze. Ben looked toward me. You hear that? I nodded. There. The voice came again, farther ahead, weak, desperate. Help. It had to be Ryan. We grabbed our radios at nearly the same time. Before either of us could transmit, Mike stepped between us. No. Ben looked confused. What do you mean, no? Mike wasn't looking at us. He was looking into the trees, listening. The voice called again. Closer now. Help. Mike quietly said something I'll never forget. That's not how lost people call for help. None of us spoke. Then, the voice came one more time. Only this time, it didn't say help. It whispered my name. Daniel. I had never met Ryan Mercer. He had never seen my face. So there was only one question left. How did he know my name? No one moved. No one spoke. The forest had gone completely silent. I kept staring into the trees, trying to figure out where the voice had come from. It wasn't loud. It wasn't echoing. It sounded close, like someone standing just out of sight behind the thick pines. Ben looked at me. You know this guy? I slowly shook my head. No. You sure? I've never met him. Claire frowned. Then why did it say your name? I don't know. Mike didn't seem interested in the answer. He was already scanning the tree line, watching, waiting. The voice came again, this time from our left, barely above a whisper. Daniel. It sounded tired, weak, like someone who'd been wandering for days. Ben instinctively took a step toward the sound. Mike grabbed the back of his vest. Don't. Ben turned around. What if that's him? Mike's expression never changed. I said don't. But I don't care what you think you heard. Ben looked frustrated. If he's alive. Mike cut him off. If Ryan Mercer is alive. He glanced toward the trees. He knows better than to leave the trail. None of us argued. Something in Mike's voice made it clear the conversation was over. A few minutes later, the rest of the search teams arrived. Command listened as Mike explained what we'd found, the strange footprints, the abandoned backpack, the voice. I expected skepticism. Instead, the incident commander simply asked one question. What time did you hear it? Mike checked his watch. 7:18. She nodded, then looked at the sky. The last bit of daylight was fading behind the treetops. We're done for tonight. Ben couldn't believe it. What? We're suspending the ground search until sunrise. He looked around in disbelief. Someone could still be alive out here. So could we, she replied, but we're not searching after dark. Ben threw his hands into the air. Since when? No one answered. The commander began assigning campsites while another volunteer quietly collected everyone's GPS coordinates. Within 20 minutes, we had a small base camp set up beside an old logging road. The fire was kept small, just enough to boil water. No one laughed. No one swapped stories. Even the experienced volunteers seemed uneasy. As darkness settled over the forest, I noticed something strange. No one was using whistles. No one was calling Ryan's name anymore. Search and rescue training teaches you to call out every few minutes. It's one of the first things you learn. But here, everyone had stopped. Finally, I leaned toward Claire. Why aren't we calling for him? She looked at me for a long moment. I was hoping you wouldn't notice. Before I could ask what she meant, Mike spoke from across the fire, loud enough for everyone to hear. From this point on, his eyes slowly moved around the circle. If anyone hears a voice outside this camp, he paused. Don't answer it. The fire crackled. No one questioned him. No one laughed. Instead, every single volunteer quietly nodded, as if they'd all heard those words before. Every one of them, except me. I waited until most of the team had settled into their tents before I walked over to Mike. He was sitting on a folding camp chair, staring into the fire, not warming his hands, just watching the flames. You gonna tell me what's going on? I asked. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he poked at the fire with a stick. Finally, he sighed. How long have you been doing search and rescue? Almost 7 years. And in those 7 years, he looked up at me. Have you ever searched after dark? I thought about it. No. Ever wonder why? I figured it was because it was dangerous. It is. He paused. But that's not the real reason. A cold breeze drifted through camp. The flames bent sideways. Mike glanced toward the woods before continuing. When I first joined search and rescue, I asked the same questions you're asking now. What did they tell you? They didn't. They just handed me one rule. He leaned forward. If you hear someone calling for help after sunset, don't answer. I frowned. That doesn't make any sense. It doesn't have to. What if it's really the missing person? Mike's eyes met mine. Then we'll find them in the morning. I couldn't hide my frustration, so we'd just leave someone out there. He nodded once. Yes. I stared at him. I don't believe that. I didn't either. His voice had become quieter now. I was 24. I thought the older volunteers had lost their minds, so I broke the rule. The crackling fire suddenly seemed louder. What happened? Mike looked into the darkness beyond camp. There was a little girl. I felt my stomach tighten. She kept crying for her mother. She sounded like she couldn't have been more than 6 years old. I grabbed my flashlight and started walking. Did you find her? No. Then what? I found footprints. What kind? The same kind we found today. Neither of us spoke. After several seconds, he continued. They circled me. They were everywhere, but I never saw who made them. I glanced toward the black wall of trees surrounding camp. So whose voice was it? Mike slowly shook his head. I've spent 32 years trying to answer that. Before I could ask another question, a voice drifted through the forest. Soft, fragile, almost too faint to hear. Mike. Every muscle in his body froze. The voice came again, a little closer this time. Mike. I looked at him. Is that? He held up one finger. Silence. No one else around the fire moved. No one even looked toward the woods. It was as if everyone had heard it, and everyone had decided to pretend they hadn't. Then, another voice. Different this time. Not Mike's name. Mine. Daniel. It sounded frightened, like someone desperately trying not to cry. I'm over here. I knew that voice. I couldn't place it immediately, but I knew it. Then it hit me. It wasn't Ryan Mercer. It wasn't anyone from Search and Rescue. It was my younger brother. The same voice he'd had when we were kids. My brother lived nearly 500 miles away, yet somehow he was standing just beyond the trees, calling for me. Every instinct I had told me to run toward that voice, It sounded exactly like my little brother. Not close, not almost. Exactly. The fear in his voice, the slight crack whenever he was about to cry, even the way he stretched out my name. Daniel, I need you. For one terrifying second, I forgot where I was. I forgot about the missing backpacker. I forgot about the strange footprints. I even forgot my brother lived hundreds of miles away. I stood up. Mike grabbed my wrist. Hard. His grip was so tight it hurt. Sit. I looked at him. That's my brother. No. It is. No. He needs help. Mike leaned so close I could see the reflection of the fire in his eyes. It knows exactly who you want to hear. The words sent a chill through my entire body. Behind us, another voice drifted through camp. This time it belonged to Ben. Claire? His voice sounded confused. Claire immediately turned. What? Ben pointed into the woods. I hear my mom. Nobody laughed. Nobody even looked surprised. Claire slowly walked over and took Ben's flashlight out of his hand. Without saying a word, she switched it off. The only light left was the small campfire. Ben looked around in disbelief. What are you doing? You don't need that. But you don't need it. The voice came again. Closer. Ben, a woman, soft, warm. I've fallen. I can't get up. Ben's breathing became faster. My mom had knee surgery last year. He looked toward the darkness. She says that all the time. Mike stood up. His voice was calm, almost rehearsed. Everyone. Without hesitation, every volunteer around the fire reached into their packs. One by one, they removed their flashlights, their lanterns, even their radios. Everything was switched off until only the campfire remained. I stared at them. What are we doing? Mike answered without taking his eyes off the trees. We're making sure nothing out there has a reason to come closer. The woods had become impossibly dark. Beyond the firelight, there was nothing, just blackness. Then something moved. Not a person, not an animal, a silhouette, far too tall. It stepped between two trees for just a moment. Then it was gone. I wasn't even sure I'd really seen it, but Mike had, because he quietly said, "Don't look for them." The words caught me off guard. Them? He nodded. If you think you saw something, you didn't. If you think you heard someone, you didn't. If you think someone needs help, they don't. The forest fell silent again. Not peaceful, waiting. Minutes passed, maybe an hour. No one checked their watch. No one spoke above a whisper. Then, from somewhere behind our camp, came the unmistakable sound of heavy footsteps. Slow, deliberate. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Whatever it wasn't trying to sneak. It wanted us to hear it. The footsteps circled the camp, never entering the firelight, always just beyond it. Crunch, crunch, crunch. I counted them, one full circle, then another, then a third, and every single volunteer sat perfectly still. No one reached for a flashlight. No one called out. No one even looked behind them. Finally, the footsteps stopped, directly behind me, close enough that I could hear slow, steady breathing. Warm air brushed against the back of my neck. Then a voice whispered, so quietly I almost missed it. Turn around. None of us turned around, not one. The voice behind me never spoke again. It just breathed. Slow, steady, like it was waiting for someone to make a mistake. I don't know how long it stood there. 5 minutes, maybe 30. Time stopped meaning anything that night. Eventually, the breathing disappeared. Not gradually. It simply wasn't there anymore. No footsteps, no branches snapping, nothing. The first hint of daylight came just after 5:30. Nobody slept. Some people sat quietly staring into the dying fire. Others pretended to organize their gear. Everyone looked exhausted. Mike was the first to stand. We move in 10. No one complained. We packed camp in complete silence. As we started down the trail, I looked back one last time. The ground around our campsite was damp from the night's dew. Every boot print we had made was still there. But surrounding them was another trail. The same long footprints we'd found yesterday. They circled the camp over and over and over again. Not one of them crossed into the firelight. Ben saw them too. His face went pale. It really was walking around us. Mike didn't even look surprised. I know. Claire quietly took photographs before we continued the search. The morning forest felt different. The birds had returned. Squirrels darted through the trees. For the first time since we'd arrived, the woods felt normal. Almost. Around 8:30, another team radioed in. Command, Team 2, static. Then we found him. Nobody spoke. The entire search stopped. We changed course immediately. It took us nearly 40 minutes to reach them. Ryan Mercer was lying at the bottom of a steep ravine. His body was partially hidden beneath fallen branches. One look told us he hadn't survived. The paramedic confirmed what we already knew. There was nothing anyone could do. The medical examiner wouldn't arrive until later that afternoon. While we secured the area, I overheard the conversation between the incident commander and the coroner. What do you think? The coroner knelt beside the body for several moments before answering. I'll know more after the examination. He paused, but judging by lividity and decomposition, he looked up. I'd estimate he died sometime yesterday morning. Yesterday morning, I felt my stomach drop. That wasn't possible. We all heard him the night before. I looked at Mike. He already knew what I was thinking. He slowly shook his head. No, I whispered. We heard his voice. Mike's expression never changed. No. Then who was calling us? He looked toward the tree line, toward the endless forest surrounding us. Then he quietly replied, the same thing. That followed him. As the recovery team prepared Ryan's body for transport, I noticed something sticking out beneath his jacket. It was his handheld GPS. The one we'd assumed was missing. The screen was cracked. The battery somehow still had power. I picked it up. The map was still open. A blinking trail showed Ryan's route through the forest. Then, about 2 miles from where we found him, his trail suddenly stopped. Not because the battery died, not because the signal was lost. The track simply ended. The next recorded point appeared nearly half a mile away. There were no points between them, no gradual movement, no wandering, just one impossible jump, as if Ryan had somehow traveled half a mile without ever taking another step. The recovery took the rest of the afternoon. By the time we carried Ryan Mercer back to the trailhead, the sun was already beginning to sink behind the trees. No one spoke much. There wasn't anything left to say. Officially, the search was over. Unofficially, it felt like none of us had actually found any answers. As I loaded my pack into my truck, I heard someone call my name, Daniel. I turned around. It was Mike. He motioned for me to follow him. Behind the ranger station sat a small maintenance building with a faded green door. He unlocked it with an old brass key. The room smelled like damp paper and cedar. Metal filing cabinets lined one wall. Shelves overflowed with maps, radios, and weather logs dating back decades. Mike walked to the last filing cabinet. He hesitated for a moment, then pulled open the bottom drawer. Inside were dozens of plain manila folders. None of them had names, only years. He pulled one from the middle and handed it to me. Read. Inside was an incident report, not from search and rescue, from the Forestry Service. The report described a search for 2 missing hunters. According to the timeline, both men vanished within hours of each other. The search lasted 4 days. Only one hunter was ever found, alive, barely. His statement was attached to the back of the report. I expected something about bears or getting lost. Instead, the first sentence read, "Please stop looking for my brother." Whatever answered me wasn't him. I slowly looked up at Mike. How many of these are there? He didn't answer. Instead, he opened the drawer wider. It wasn't dozens. It was hundreds. Reports from different years, different search teams, different missing people. But as I skimmed through them, the same details kept appearing. Voices after sunset. Footprints that couldn't be identified. Searches suspended until daylight. Experienced volunteers refusing to explain why. One report had an entire paragraph blacked out. Another was missing every other page. Some folders contained handwritten notes clipped to the front. One of them simply read, "Do not allow inexperienced volunteers to search after dark." Another said, if voices begin identifying team members by name, return to base immediately. Then I found the oldest report in the cabinet, dated October 14th, 1969. It wasn't typed. It had been written by hand. The paper had yellowed with age. The ink had faded. The final paragraph stopped me cold. The voices are becoming more convincing. They no longer call only for help. They now imitate family members. We believe they learn by listening. I read that sentence 3 times, then a fourth. We believe they learn by listening. I looked at Mike, who wrote this. He shook his head. I don't know. Why wasn't any of this ever mentioned during training? Because if we told every new volunteer what was in those reports, he looked toward the forest outside the dusty window, we'd never have another volunteer. Before I could ask another question, someone knocked on the maintenance building door. 3 slow knocks. Mike frowned. We're closed. No answer. Just 3 more knocks. He opened the door. No one was there. Only the empty parking lot. As he started to close it, I noticed something lying on the concrete, a folded piece of paper. It hadn't been there a moment earlier. Mike picked it up. His face immediately lost all color. What is it? I asked. Without saying a word, he handed it to me. It was a photocopy, not from one of the old reports, from today's search log. Across the bottom, someone had written a single sentence in black marker. Next time, don't stop looking. I never found out who left that note. No security cameras covered the maintenance building. No one admitted to writing it. And according to the incident commander, there hadn't been anyone else at the ranger station when Mike and I went inside. The photocopy disappeared the following morning. Mike said he left it on his desk before going home. When he came back, it was gone. No report was ever filed. No one talked about it again. Officially, Ryan Mercer's death was ruled an accident. The report concluded he'd fallen into the ravine while attempting to navigate difficult terrain. Case closed. That's the version his family deserved. It's also the version the public would believe, but it wasn't the version I believed. I stayed with search and rescue for another 6 months, long enough to convince myself that what happened during that search had been a once-in-a-lifetime experience. It wasn't. A few months later, another call came in. A father and his teenage son had gone missing during an overnight hunting trip. The search looked routine until sunset. Just before we were ordered back to camp, someone heard the father yelling. His voice echoed through the trees, clear as day. He kept shouting that his son was injured. One of our newer volunteers started running toward him. Mike caught him by the shoulder, the same way he'd stopped Ben, the same way he'd stopped me. The next morning, we found both hunters. Neither of them had survived the night. According to the coroner, they had both died several hours before anyone heard the father calling for help. That was enough for me. I turned in my radio, my GPS, my uniform. I thanked everyone for the years we'd spent together. Then I left. I haven't volunteered since. People still ask why. I usually tell them I wanted to spend more time with my family. It's easier than explaining the truth. Every now and then, someone goes missing in those same forests. I'll see the story on the evening news, search helicopters, canine teams, search and rescue volunteers walking shoulder to shoulder through the trees. And I always wonder what they're hearing after the sun goes down. A few weeks ago, I received a message from Ben. We hadn't spoken in years. It only said, Mike passed away last winter. I stared at my phone for a long time. Then another message arrived. This one was longer. Before he died, he asked me to tell you something. He said you were finally ready to know the last rule. There was a photograph attached. It showed the inside cover of Mike's old field notebook. Written neatly in faded blue ink were 7 rules. The first 6, I already knew. Don't search alone. Never ignore your radio. Leave the woods before dark. Don't answer voices. Don't follow footprints you can't identify. Never leave the fire at night. Then there was one final rule, the one Mike had never told me, the one written at the very bottom of the page. It simply read, if it already knows your name, you're no longer the one being searched for. I haven't set foot in those woods since. And if you ever find yourself lost in the forest after sunset and someone calls your name from somewhere beyond the trees, don't answer, no matter how familiar the voice sounds. Because if it knows your name, it already knows exactly where you are. If this story gave you a chill, share it with someone who enjoys a good, unsettling tale.